Hello, we're back, folks. So we're going to try and do a little bit more than we did last time. We're going to have a look at the depth buffer again and try and render it. Last time I managed to get myself completely lost, and it was because I was trying to hold too many concepts in my brain at once, or at least new concepts which weren't clear to me. So I've literally just gone back to pen and paper and I've scribbled down basically scribbled down the concepts that I need to know and keep in my head. And I've sort of tried to kind of document it here as well. So what I want to do is so we've got, let's go back to where we were. So I think we're back to a point where we can run. I committed code that was broken, which is never a good thing. And I'm also in a separate branch. I've created one just so that I can break everything without worrying about the main branch, and push that to GitHub. And what I've got is this window that renders the polygons with the textures on them, and that's fine. That uses a single pipeline, and the requisite vertex fragment shaders that we've come and looked at prior to all this stuff. And what I'm going to do, and so this thing renders to the entire surface, or view rather. There's a view texture that's created when you render. If you go all the way down, let me just get rid of this view here. It was in our update method, I think. No, here it is, render. I'll make this a bit bigger again so that folks can have a hope of seeing it. So inside of the render function here, how about I go to desktop? Inside of the render function here, what you can see is this view, which is a texture for the entire surface. Okay, so surface get current texture, and then create view, and then we basically pass that view to the render pass descriptor. So that renders over the entire scene, which is great. What I want to do is have like a viewport, or I don't want to overlay the entire thing, although I mean that's possible. I could just replace the entire view. But what I want to do is have an option of rendering another kind of layer or canvas or view over this one that shows the depth buffer. So I'm going to need a separate pipeline, and I'll need a separate set of shaders. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that comes along there. So we get a texture, which was called the depth buffer, or what do we call it? Depth texture, sorry. And we're storing that. So we will, in the render pass, we'll run the first pipeline. So let's get a render pass. So this is our render pass. And we set the pipeline. And what I've already done is I've created a little vector of pipelines, so that we can have more than one pipeline and reference them here. Ultimately, you would need a structure, I think, to do something a bit different. You'd need, like, for example, you'd need to define which pipelines, which order they run in, and so on. So you'd probably introduce some other structures, which I haven't done yet, but I'll look into that. Presumably that's how game engines do it, or I'm sure it's a lot more sophisticated than that. And so we run this. I believe that when... Yeah, see, what I don't know, I guess I'm not sure when the depth texture is created. I guess we could find out, couldn't we? Depth texture. I think it must be... So we've got render pass set pipeline. We bind differently. So I'll probably get rid of this thing. And the bind group... The bind group... Yeah, no, I'll keep it totally separate. What I was thinking was you could, I don't know if this is possible, but if you could just set up a separate bind group layout, a separate bind group, and then attach that to the render pass. But let's think about that. So if we set up a separate bind group layout and bind group, which is what I'd started to try and do in the previous version, I think we'll need to generate a different texture as well. Like I wonder if we can just use this depth texture natively or not. So the depth texture doesn't do much, does it? It create depth texture. What did it do? It just creates the configuration, right? Like the size, how it's used. Create view, and then a sampler. Yeah, so this texture isn't populated until the render pass is finished. Is that right? It'll be interesting to know whether we can use that texture anyway, or if we have to create a separate one. The question is, like this depth texture, this depth texture is too wide. Well, I mean, it might be, it's good if we want the full screen. Label, depth format, render attachment. Because config width and height should be the entire width of the window and height of the window. The sampler okay, so anyway, back to here, it gave us a hint. We'll have to use the sampler comparison uniform type and the texture sample compare function. Sampler device. Like you want to reuse the same depth texture, right? Pretty sure. I wonder when the depth. So what is depth stencil attachment? So the render pass. So this stuff doesn't actually happen, right, until draw. You've got an encoder. Just create it here. Then you do begin render pass. You pass in the descriptor. Depth stencil attachment. The view is it's not helpful. Did I close texture? That was stupid. Okay. Okay, that's a WGPU. Oh, it's our texture, right? And texture view is a WGPU texture view. Okay. I'm assuming it's only created it during the render pass, but so render pass set pipeline. If self flip blah blah set bind group for the camera uniform buffer vertex buffer instance. Oh, sorry, to vertex. Oop. Draw indexed. Q submit. Begin render pass. Question is, do I need 2 render passes? I don't think I do. I think I just need 2 pipelines. Like, part of me doesn't even want to create a separate pipeline. But I guess it makes it easier because we can have completely different shaders and stuff like that if we need it. And also, do we need, I don't think we need a vertex shader. Like, a vertex shader is compulsory. Because the bind groups are used in the render pass. Yeah, the shaders are set up in the pipeline. And if we want a separate shader, which we do, I think, then we'll need to have a separate pipeline. Yeah. Anyway, so what we're going to do is create another pipeline. And to do that, I'm going to create a new struct, which I'm probably going to regret. But part of me wants to do something like this. So under all this camera stuff, before we get to the main app, part of me wants to do this. Something like struct depth pipeline. Pipeline, which will be a WGPU. Pipeline, render pipeline. And then impl depth pipeline. So function new. Like, it doesn't even need to be specific to depth pipeline. Like, you generalize this eventually. So you'd go pipeline, go so So let pipeline equal WGPU render pipeline we need a pipeline layout. Let layout, oh, we'll do, yeah, we'll just call it layout. Pipeline layout. Where is our documentation? Pipeline layout. Create pipeline. Oh, I need a device. Okay, cool. So device will be, okay, so we'll do device dot create pipeline layout, and then we'll have a descriptor. We need to do all the bind group shit as well. So we'll just see what we did down here. And what bind group do we need? We just need like a texture, one that binds the depth texture. So the best one to copy would be like something like this. Okay, so this is kind of what we did before. So we'll have a depth texture bind group layout. Oh, I actually had that down there. Depth texture bind group layout. Yeah, we definitely didn't need that, right? Cool. And did we still have depth texture stuff? We did. Depth texture. So how different was this? We've got our depth texture bind group layout, and we only need a fragment shader. And we had one for the texture and one for the sampler. But didn't our hint say we didn't need a sampler? We can sample it. Okay, so we do need to sample it in the shader. Okay, and then for our depth bind group, how different is it to a normal texture one that we used before? So we had depth texture view, depth texture sampler. don't have depth texture, so I guess we can pass it a reference to it. Depth texture is a reference to a texture. I'll just be able to do this, I think. Oh no, it needs to be a reference. Okay. Don't know why there's a naming convention here for these layouts. It's underscores. Don't know. Might as well keep it consistent, right? Okay. Then bind group layout, push constant. So let's have a look at how we did the pipeline before. Pipeline layout. Render pipeline layout. Yeah, and I want all these shader things too, right? I want a pipeline and all this stuff. Except call it layout and pipeline instead. All right. We don't have config, but we do have we don't have config. Oh yeah. Well, we've got depth bind group layout, right? Something like that. Is that what we called it? Depth texture bind group. So we still need config. So this isn't going to be accurate, this pipeline, but it's not the right one, and we're going to have different shaders. So this will be a, and it will be a fragment shader. So we'll do, I don't know, depth shader. Depth shader. Oh, hang on, what did it? Oh, standard. Okay. So we'll do depth shader, and then depth shader here. Need to create a new shader. Can I just copy and paste this one? Why not? What could possibly go wrong? Rename depth shader. And then this one is, let's, I don't know, make it do something different. How do we know when it's running? Let's do the one where it's like this is bugging out and doing all white. But anyway, depth shader doesn't exist. It does. Just created it. Didn't I? Where did I create it? Huh? There. Depth shader WGSL. Wiggle. Isn't that how they say it? Wiggle? Depth shader wiggle. Looks good. What are you complaining about? Stop it. Stop complaining. How funny. I bet you if we restart this Rust analyzer, it will be okay with it. Now do we need a, do you need a vertex shader? Oh, hang on. I think you do. It's like compulsory, isn't it? But what would we be, we're not rendering anything. Are we? Or are we? The way I think this should work is, I'm hoping anyway, in the same render pass we can have two pipelines, and the first one renders this view that we've got, and the other one renders another view on top of it, or I don't know, somewhere on the surface. But yes, something tells me that a vertex thingy is required. So you can't just create a surface and create a render pipeline. Let's have a look. So does that mean you can't just create a pipeline? Sorry, a surface and a view, and use a fragment shader? Create render pipeline. No. Yeah, device. And it's the descriptor. Vertex. The compiled vertex. Is it required? Yes. It's not optional. Whereas everything else is. What if you don't want to do anything in the vertex state? Vertex processing. What if you're not rendering vertices? A view into memory. A view into memory. A view into buffer memory as an array of structures. Each element is like a structure with a memory layout. a funny feeling this isn't going to work, but let's keep trying. So now we've got a thing called depth pipeline that builds a brand new render pipeline, puts it into a field called pipeline, and it's probably wrong everywhere, but we pass in a texture device. Oh, didn't we need config? This shouldn't work, right? Cargo run. Yeah. So why isn't this 369? Wow, it's not even flagging this as broken now. Let's stop the server altogether. Hello? Hello, Rust Analyzer. Why is this so buggy? Or what am I doing with it that's causing it to bug out? Anyway, so config isn't found. Do I have to keep passing config around? Like, seriously? It was simul app config. All right, we will pass config around. Straight after the device. We'll have config, which is a what am I doing? Such an idiot. It is WGPU surface config, isn't it? Surface configuration. Okay. Okay. So this thing, so we need device, config, and depth texture. I'm not sure about depth texture. Okay, so this thing should just do what we're doing before. Okay, now can we bind another pipeline? Because in the render pass, we set the pipeline here, and we set all the bind groups. Okay, I need to know when. I need to know when the depth texture is created. Don't know. Okay, in WGPU, in WebGPU, specifically the WGPU Rust implementation, when is the depth buffer texture created? Is it when the draw call is completed or earlier than that? When you initialize your rendering resources. Pipeline. The render pipeline is configured to use it, yes. When setting up the render pass, you attach the depth texture, yes, as a depth attachment. This happens when you start recording commands for the render pass, indicating the depth buffer, blah, 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 blah. Set up and attached, depth testing, depth values. Okay. So if I wanted to render it, could I just do it? When do I do it? Question is, do I need 2 render passes? Jesus. I didn't think I did. Can you do multiple draws? Can you call... I guess you can, right? Like, this is going to be pretty dodgy. Render pass dot set pipeline self pipelines 1, but I'll just do it this way for now. I'll do let depth pipeline equal depth pipeline new, and then device self device. Oh yeah, reference, yep. Self config, and then the depth texture, self.depth texture. Okay, and then I'll set self pipelines dot append. Can I do that? Who knows? Probably not. Expected mutable reference found. Depth pipeline. Pipeline. How do you add a single element to a Rust vector? Push. Of course. Push. So we want to go to pipelines. Do we have to create it all in new? I guess we do. Pipelines. Render pipeline. So this creates a render pipeline, and then we'll do a depth pipeline. And then doesn't need to be that, does it? What's it called? No. What are we doing? Oh, we never set it up. So we add the render pipeline, then we create a new one, and then we push that. I guess it needs to be mutable. And then this one just needs to be, but I wonder if that's, let's have a look. So we get pipelines, so we'll create another pipeline for rendering the depth buffer, or the depth, yeah. Create a list of pipelines to run during the render pass. Cargo run. What errors will we get here? Some pretty good ones. Okay, cool. So we've got an error with our, so that seems to have worked. So if we look at, so render pass, so it's validating depth pipeline. Set the depth buffer render pipe. Is that a render pipeline? I guess that's what it's called. Or is it? It's not a render pipeline, is it? What do you call these things? Pipelines. They're just pipelines, aren't they? That is active render pipeline. Okay, cool. So when you set the active render pipeline, what does that do? Do you need to draw again? Draw calls. And then you draw again, right? Then you go render pass, draw, and then we don't have vertices. Shit. What was draw index doing? Indices and base vertex. This was vertices. We haven't set an active vertex buffer. Yeah, so we'll work out how to draw it later. To do we draw here? If so, how? All right. Okay. So anyway, the fact that we've set the pipeline for the draw pipeline, for the depth pipeline, means that. Do we have to set bind groups and stuff? I hope not. It's all here, right? But yeah, but it's never used. Because bind groups are called in the render pass. They're attached during the render pass. So this thing needs to be I guess we could just put it in here, right? Do bind group double WGPU bind group. Then we'll do bind group is texture, no, depth texture. Yeah, something like that. Then down in here, we can at least set it. So you do render pass, set bind group, oh. So the app needs more than, oh no, it should work. So it should have self pipelines 1. Oh. Yeah, that's annoying. So I will need in simul new so these pipelines. Yeah, I'm losing info here. Dope. It creates a depth pipeline. It's almost like we need to do all of this stuff. Where do the instances get used? Tempted to pull this out into a separate pipeline definition. Like, you almost want a pipeline trait. And then you have different types of pipelines. That seems like it's getting a bit stupid. All I want to do is get this thing working. I'll stop refactoring. So we've got pipelines. Oh, we don't need depth texture anymore, do we? Oh, we probably do. Yeah. Complicated. Okay. So it was complaining that in our depth texture bind group, sampler binding 1 expects comparison false, but given a sampler with comparison true. What does that mean? So let's find depth texture bind group. Okay, that was here. So this is where we use so we set up a texture view and a sampler. And it's saying that the sampler binding 1, yes, this one here, expects comparison equals false. But given a sampler. Is that because the layout said something about that? What defines the comparison equals false bit. Must be something to do with this binding type sampler. So binding type sampler. Okay. Sampler that can be used to sample a texture. Cool. But what are the types? Filtering, non-filtering, and comparison. The sampling result is produced based on more than a single color sample from a texture. No idea. The sampling result is produced based on a single color sample. No idea. Use as a comparison sampler instead of a normal sampler. For more info, take a look at the analogous functionality in OpenGL. We'll have to use the sampler comparison uniform type and the texture sample compare function. So weird. I feel like I'm completely wasting my time. Well, I do need a different shader, right? So I guess I do need to do all this. Just feels like so much rework. Use as a comparison sampler. What is a sampler? Normal texture. Yeah, I just want to treat it as a normal texture, don't I? Should it be non-filtering? But the expects comparison false, but given a sampler with comparison true. Really? So this sampler is this sampler, depth texture sampler, must be doing the wrong thing. Yeah. So that means the texture bit. That means this sampler thing is doing something. Maybe that's what this thing is all about. Compare. So device create sampler. Create sampler. Sampler creates a new sampler. Oh, awesome. I'm going to keep debugging this and see where I can go. But the compare function, it's almost like we want it to just be, we want a different sampler here. And the question is, this is starting to make sense to me slowly. So I think what we need to do is create a new texture, which feels like a pain in the butt. But we do need to do that anyway, possibly, because we'll need different widths and heights. I think. Don't know. All right, we're going to have to get into this. I have to understand more what a WGPU texture does and looks like, because this, but then so the bit that I still don't understand, right, is the depth texture is created Yeah. Okay, so that is the cause of the problem. But like if we go down into, where was it, render pass, I guess. So as far as I understand it, the depth information is created during the render pass somehow. Like ChatGPT wasn't very helpful. Said, you know, it's created when you initialize, yeah, whatever. The pipeline's configured to use it. When setting up the rendering pass, you attach the depth texture as a depth attachment. This happens. So that's this bit, I think. During the draw calls, the depth buffer is already set up and attached. The GPU uses the depth buffer to perform depth testing. Yeah. And so how do I get access to it as a texture if I have to create a new texture? Like, can I just clone it and override the sampler method or something? Like, the view is probably still correct. Maybe. But I mean, it'll probably be too big. Who cares? It's like we just need to override the sampler. So can we like... But that's at creation time. All this stuff is set up. So it's almost like we need to pass in like a... whether we need a comparison sampler or not. Like this. So I'm not suggesting it's like, but it's like you pass in another flag and you say if comparison, then this. Ternary operator in Rust. How do you do it? That's right. It doesn't have one. Let value blah. So let sampler equal if comparison else So I almost want to do something like this, right? Where you and then you don't do a compare function. So you just do none. Can it be none? What's the right way to do this? I feel like that's worse. If comparison, then you want this. Else you want this. Right? And then you pass in a bool. Like, it's terrible, but you do something like this. And then you deal with create depth texture is missing, true or false here. Depth texture bool. So true. Terrible. Absolutely terrible code. So this is where it's, but that still doesn't work. So basically I need to create a new one. And so if I do that, then how does it get populated? Yeah, this just feels wrong. Create sampler. Compare function. Never. If this is enabled. Yeah. Yeah, so this is, again, I'm getting to the same problem where I don't know how this bloody depth texture is created. And so what, because in my mind, what I'm trying to do here is I've created a new pipeline. That new pipeline, sorry, I set the pipeline. So the pipeline was created here using the existing depth texture that we had, which was created as a, just created here. And so it's when it's attached, right? Depth texture view. So let's have a look at depth stencil attachment. a view to use as an attachment. Because we never tried to create a bind group for this thing. And because I'm treating it as a texture, what do you call it? Like a, yeah, it's a texture bind group. Okay, I'm going to take a small break, 5-10 minutes, and I'll be back, and then we'll try and sort out what we're doing here. Stick around. Okay, we're back. Now I've been looking at this and where I don't know. I think I'm stuck again, which is okay. I think I've made a bit of progress. The shader's not updated yet. I've been looking at this and oh, hang on a second. All right, that was my live stream in the background. So I think what I need to do here. Well, firstly, the shader's wrong. That's fine. We're going to need a way of rendering the values in the depth texture, and that's fine. I haven't got there yet. The vertex shader we're going to have to work out, like what is required. I have a feeling that what I need to do is render basically a square. I think like what I'm doing at the moment is I'm rendering these polygons and then I'm using instancing to like render 100 of them. And every update that happens, so every frame that happens. And I've just created a new pipeline, right? To add to the render pass. And I think I'm going to have a new set of vertex buffers, a new set of vertices. Because if you remember, like, can I do draw index twice in a single thing? I guess so. So like, what I think I need to do, so I've set the pipeline. That's fine. Then I need to set up vertices to render a rectangle, basically. And that could either be the full width and height of the surface, or a sub part of the view for a viewport, or like, I don't know what we call this, but viewport's the best word I can think of, type effect, right? So we need to set up the vertices. We don't need we don't need an instance buffer, and then like draw indexed. Like in the instance buffer. Buffers and indices. And we don't want a camera, like we don't want a view perspective projection. Like, we don't need any of this stuff for this bit.